Your zip code is the #1 predictor of your future success. Once you understand ownership, Yuval Noah Harari says, even money is just a story. When I think about, so I've worked in the inner cities a lot, and you begin to realize, wait a second, the generational poverty is a mindset knowledge problem far more than it's a money problem, because they manage to pass on a likelihood of being poor. And so when you think about, okay, well, right now in the US for sure, and I would imagine most of the Western world, that your zip code is the #1 predictor of your future success, more than your IQ, which I'm just not willing to live in that world. But that's a really fascinating phenomenon. And when you begin to ask the question, how is that possible? So you have extraordinarily smart people that regardless of their IQ are going to be trapped in a poverty cycle. Why is that? And some of it has to do with what a guy named Jeffrey Canada discovered in terms of the language centers of your brain. And if you're not hearing enough words when you're an infant, just the language centers don't develop well, and you're gonna have a hard time interviewing for jobs and climbing the sort of traditional corporate ladder in that way. And then they just also help you with communication. But the other part is what I call your frame of reference. What do you believe to be true about yourself and about the world? And one of the ideas that fails to get passed on in that poverty cycle is an idea of ownership. And once you understand ownership, now you get into that cycle that you're talking about where you can sell something in the future because you own it today, and you hopefully buy low and then sell high. And that really is like just the dead simple equation. And I just to plant a flag that we'll come back to, hold all these ideas in my head, you had mentioned earlier as like a throwaway that a lot of wealth was generated in the collapse and of the economy. And so I want people to understand that this is a game, and I don't mean that in any sort of derogatory way, but it has rules. And if you understand those rules, there's always an opportunity, especially in moments of disruption. And we're living through this incredible technological disruption right now. Okay, so back to this idea of ownership. So when I look at Bitcoin, what I see is something that I can own, right? There will only ever be 21 million of these. Now, like anything, as Yuval Noah Harari says, even money is just a story, right? It's a fiction that we all tell, and it only has value when we agree that it has value. So Bitcoin has that same sort of Achilles heel, that if tomorrow everybody stopped believing that owning that has any value, then it would have no value. But we have this ultra scarce thing that the last 10 years have proven people believe has value, and you can own a piece of that. And as we go, if it is true that more and more people will pour into this digitization of economic value, essentially, then those 21 million units are going to become hyper scarce and hyper valuable. Now, the great news is that you can fractionalize it, so you don't have to own one. You can own some tiny fraction of it. But now you have ownership. So you're able to buy something now that you can own as it appreciates in value, and then you can sell it later. And so it becomes just this buy and wait game that real estate maybe still is, but that's why real estate has worked over time. You owned it. You could also live in it, which is certainly advantageous. And then the expectation was that it would go up in value. When I think about Ethereum, at first I was like, okay, I like how much, we haven't named Metcalfe's law. You've talked about it, but how you can value something based on its network adoption curve. And so I could see there was something going there. And then when I got into NFTs, I realized I just had to buy a bunch of Ethereum to use it. And so I was like, okay, well, wait a second. If I'm over here like scrambling just to buy it to spend it, I'm like, this is me being able to buy into the dollar when it's like new and nobody's sure if we're going to use it. I thought, whoa, I would take that opportunity. So that's how I see the difference in the two. One is just sort of straight ownership of something. And then one is like, well, I know people use this, and because people use it and there's controls around the supply, that the odds are that it will go up in value.
Ethereum's kind of like owning a part of the internet. Everybody will have, even if you're not very familiar with the space, will have heard the term DeFi or NFTs or tokens. And basically, most of that is still being built on Ethereum. And as you said, the network, so what is this Metcalfe's law that you and I have referred to? Metcalfe's law it really started to become understood in the 80s, and then much more so as mobile phone networks started, these giant connected networks, right? Because digital technology allowed networks to connect. Before it's humans, we couldn't connect with each other in the same way. So networks connect with mobile phones, suddenly they explode in value. All these phone companies, huge companies. And if you added them all up around the world, they'd be worth tens of trillions probably. We just don't even think of it in those terms because they're fragmented networks. Then the internet comes along, this free network, and everybody builds on top of it, and they create network effects. Like the most classic example is Facebook. Facebook connects us with friends and family, and in exchange, they get your data, they sell you adverts, so you've got a bunch of people using it, a bunch of businesses now building on it, and this advertising monetization structure. Shareholders get rich. You and I get to unfortunately meet somebody from university that we don't want to talk to, that we met 20 years ago and we're now connected with again. It's that. Ethereum and Bitcoin is different. You're the owner of the network and the user. So as a user, like you said, with the NFT, you're actually owning a share of the network itself. So everybody uses it, owns a part of it. Therefore, if the network's going to get used a lot, you're all going to get rich, and the value of the network's going to go up massively. And the more people build interconnections, so Metcalfe's law is not only just the number of nodes, i.e. the number of users, but how much they connect with each other. Well, you're seeing it because there's NFTs and there's DeFi and there's all of these applications, or the store of money aspect. These things all together, and then there's the linking of all of these, like Chainlink or some of these other protocols, Polkadot. They're linking all this ecosystems together. So I can send you $1 instantaneously, and we have no idea whether it went on Bitcoin rails, XRP rails, Ethereum rails. And guess what? We don't care. I promised you $1, you want to get the dollar instantaneously. That's interoperability. That's all coming. So this is what Ethereum is about. It's the magnitude of this network, where everybody's developing everything on top of it, and it's scarce supply. So it's seeing an even faster adoption rate than Bitcoin now, for the reasons that seem pretty clear, because it has more use cases than currently the Bitcoin blockchain does. Doesn't mean Bitcoin blockchain can't in due course, but right now there's a lot more use cases in Ethereum. It's super exciting. The way it's so impossible to change any of the attributes of Bitcoin. It is so secure. It's the most secure of all protocols. So let it be what it wants to be. Now, people are building things like the Lightning layer, which allows you to do lots of fast payments over the top. Maybe that scales. Maybe it doesn't. It doesn't really matter. That store of value for every person to think of like it's owning a piece of Manhattan real estate at low prices, that's never going away. Not in the conceivable future, because humans have now said it has value and it's being adopted very fast. So no, Ethereum's a very different thing. It doesn't compete. That's how I like to think about it. And unfortunately, when you go online, people will tell you, well, it's competing and it's not as good. You have to ignore all of that and look at the whole space overall and just be honest, saying, we don't know where this is going to be in 10 years' time. And like you say, so therefore I can own 3 of these things. And probability is I'm going to capture a large part of this, and maybe I'll adapt in due course. Don't overforce the narrative. Just be broad, be open, and always be learning, as you rightly said, because we don't know. This is all new and it's happening at lightning speed.